The billionaire had exactly 7 minutes left to live. He just didn't know it yet. He sat alone in the back corner of an upscale restaurant, dressed in a charcoal suit that cost more than the waitress's entire yearly salary. His phone rested beside a half-finished glass of water, his briefcase was tucked beneath the table, and across from him sat an empty chair reserved for the business partner who had promised to arrive at 8:30. But the waitress standing beside his table had stopped breathing. She had seen the man behind him. She had recognized the cold expression, the hand disappearing beneath a dark jacket, and the way his eyes kept moving toward the billionaire's reflection in the restaurant window. The waitress couldn't warn him aloud. Because the man behind him was watching her too. So she did the only thing she could think of. She picked up the billionaire's bill, circled 3 words printed on the receipt, and quietly placed it beneath his hand. Gunman. Behind you. Exit now. If you believe kindness can save a life and that second chances can come from the most unexpected people, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who believes in compassion, and subscribe to Kindness Speaks. Because sometimes, the person we almost ignore may be the very person who changes everything. The billionaire's name was Adrian Cole, 48 years old, founder and chief executive of Cole Meridian Holdings, a financial empire that had grown from a tiny investment office into one of the most powerful private firms in the country. Newspapers described him as brilliant, ruthless, disciplined, and nearly impossible to surprise. Business magazines regularly featured his photograph beneath headlines about acquisitions, billion-dollar negotiations, and market dominance. People who worked for him knew him as a man who rarely smiled, rarely trusted, and almost never allowed emotion to influence a decision. He had spent 25 years building an empire because he believed money could solve nearly every problem. What he had learned, painfully, was that money could buy security systems, lawyers, guards, houses behind gates, and private planes, but it could not buy trust. That evening, Adrian had come to the restaurant because he was supposed to finalize the most important business deal of his career. The transaction involved a technology company whose valuation had risen dramatically over the previous 2 years. If the acquisition succeeded, his company would enter an entirely new market and potentially increase its value by billions. If it failed, the consequences would be severe. Investors were waiting. Competitors were watching. And someone inside his own organization had apparently leaked confidential information about the deal. Adrian had already received one strange message that afternoon. Do not sign anything tonight. There was no name attached. He had deleted it. He had told himself that fear was a luxury successful people could not afford. Now, at 8:24 p.m., he sat beneath soft white restaurant lighting, studying the entrance through the reflection in the window. The restaurant was elegant without being flashy, filled with businessmen, couples, tourists, and families celebrating birthdays. Soft music played in the background. Plates moved between tables. Glasses clinked. Nobody appeared frightened. Nobody except a 29-year-old waitress named Mara Bennett. Mara had been working there for almost 3 years. She was not supposed to be on that section of the restaurant that night. Her regular shift was in the front dining room, but another waitress had called in sick, leaving Mara responsible for the private dining area in the back. She had arrived that evening with less than $10 in her purse and a painful reminder that her rent was due in 4 days. Her younger brother, Daniel, was 21 and recovering from a serious accident. Their mother had passed away years earlier, leaving Mara as the only person Daniel could depend on. Mara worked 6 days a week, took extra shifts whenever she could, and still worried about whether she could afford his next round of physical therapy. She was exhausted. But exhaustion had taught her something. It had taught her to notice people. She noticed when a customer was lonely. She noticed when someone was pretending to be fine. She noticed when a husband kept checking his phone while his wife talked. She noticed when a child looked frightened by the noise around him. And that night, she noticed the man behind Adrian. He had entered at 8:19. He had not ordered anything. He had chosen a table where he could see Adrian clearly. And when Mara approached him, he had simply told her he was waiting for someone. But Mara had worked around enough nervous people to understand that his behavior wasn't normal. He kept touching the inside of his jacket. His jaw was tight. His eyes moved constantly. And when Mara turned away, she saw his reflection in the polished glass behind the bar. He wasn't waiting for anyone. He was waiting for Adrian. Mara's heart began beating faster. She considered calling security. Then she saw the second man enter. He walked directly toward the private dining area but stopped near the entrance after receiving a quick nod from the man in the jacket. 2 men. 1 target. And something was terribly wrong. Mara tried to remain calm. She walked toward Adrian's table carrying a fresh glass of water. Her hands were steady, but her thoughts were racing. She wanted to warn him, but if she suddenly whispered something, the man behind him might notice. If she ran toward the kitchen, the man could act. Then Mara noticed the bill. Adrian had asked for it earlier, although he hadn't finished his meal. The receipt contained several printed words. She stared at it for 2 seconds. Then she made her decision. She picked up a pen. Her hand trembled. She circled the words. Gunman. Then she circled another. Behind. And finally. Exit. She folded the receipt once. She placed it beneath Adrian's phone. And she walked away. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then Adrian looked down. His eyes moved across the receipt. His expression changed. He didn't turn around. That was the first thing that saved his life. Instead, he calmly picked up his phone and opened the camera. Using the black screen as a reflection, he looked behind himself. The man in the dark jacket was staring directly at him. And beneath the man's jacket, Adrian saw the unmistakable shape of a handgun. Adrian's pulse surged. But the next realization was worse. The second man near the entrance wasn't watching Adrian. He was watching the exits. They weren't simply threatening him. They had planned the room. Adrian slowly stood. He didn't run. He didn't shout. He picked up his briefcase, placed his phone in his pocket, and walked toward the restroom as though nothing had happened. Mara watched from behind the service station. The man in the dark jacket stood too. But before he could follow, the restaurant manager stepped into his path, asking whether he needed anything. Those few seconds were enough. Adrian entered the hallway. Mara immediately followed. She found him near the emergency exit. For the first time, she saw fear in his face. Not panic. Something deeper. The realization that someone he trusted had probably arranged his death. Adrian looked at the receipt in his hand. He asked Mara how she knew. She didn't answer immediately. She simply pointed toward the dining room. The man in the dark jacket was now standing. Mara's eyes filled with fear. Adrian understood. They had to leave. They slipped through the emergency exit and entered the narrow service alley behind the restaurant. Cold night air hit Adrian's face. Mara followed him. For a few moments they stood silently behind a delivery truck. Then they heard the emergency door open. Someone was coming. Mara grabbed Adrian's sleeve and pulled him behind the truck. The 2 men stepped into the alley. They looked around. One of them cursed. The other said something quietly before both returned inside. Adrian stared at Mara. The billionaire who could buy almost anything suddenly looked like a frightened human being. And the waitress who had almost no money looked like the strongest person in the world. But the danger wasn't over. Adrian called his head of security. No answer. He called his personal driver. No answer. Then he called his chief financial officer. The phone rang once. Twice. 3 times. Voicemail. Adrian stared at the screen. The man who had arranged the meeting. The man who had insisted Adrian come alone. The man who had access to the company's confidential information. His own business partner. For years, Adrian had believed betrayal would come from competitors. He had never considered that it might come from someone sitting beside him in board meetings. Mara watched him struggle with the realization. Then Adrian asked why she had risked herself. Mara looked down at her hands. She thought about Daniel waiting at home. She thought about her mother's voice from years ago, telling her that when you see someone falling, you don't ask whether they deserve help before reaching out. Mara had been poor most of her life. But her mother had taught her that being poor and being powerless were not the same thing. Mara had no millions. No security team. No private helicopter. No influence. She had only noticed something wrong. And she had acted. That was enough. Adrian insisted on taking her somewhere safe. Mara refused at first. She didn't want charity. She didn't want money. She didn't want to become another person orbiting his enormous world. But Adrian didn't offer her money. He simply asked where she lived. When Mara told him, Adrian became quiet. Her apartment was in an aging neighborhood nearly 40 minutes away. Daniel was alone. Adrian immediately understood that the people hunting him might eventually realize Mara had helped him. They could come looking for her. So Adrian called the only security specialist he trusted. Within 20 minutes, a discreet security team arrived. They moved Mara and Daniel to a secure location. And that was when Adrian discovered the second truth. Mara's brother needed medical treatment that their family couldn't afford. Adrian offered to pay. Mara refused. She told him that helping someone shouldn't mean owning them. Adrian looked at her for a long moment. Nobody had ever spoken to him that way. People usually accepted his money before he finished offering it. Mara didn't. So Adrian did something unusual. He listened. He asked what she actually needed. Mara finally admitted that Daniel needed rehabilitation, and that she was working so many hours because she was terrified of losing their apartment. Adrian didn't hand her an envelope. He arranged an anonymous scholarship through a medical foundation. Mara only discovered months later that he had been behind it. But before that happened, Adrian had to survive the night. Investigators arrived. Security footage was reviewed. The restaurant's cameras revealed that the two men had entered separately. Further investigation uncovered a shocking trail of financial transfers. Millions of dollars had moved through shell companies connected to Adrian's chief financial officer. The business deal had been a trap. The acquisition would have forced Adrian to sign documents giving certain partners control over a major part of his company. If he resisted, the gunman was supposed to eliminate him. The betrayal was bigger than Adrian had imagined. But there was one problem for the criminals. Mara had seen them. And Adrian had survived. The investigation lasted for weeks. Eventually, arrests were made. The attempted murder plot became national news. Adrian was photographed leaving the courthouse. Reporters surrounded him. They asked how he had survived. He could have talked about his security team. He could have talked about his intelligence analysts. He could have talked about his wealth. Instead, he said only that a waitress had saved his life. Mara hated the attention. She returned to work as soon as she could. She didn't want interviews. She didn't want television appearances. She didn't want people calling her a hero. She simply wanted to work and take care of Daniel. But something had changed inside Adrian. For the first